looked at the impact of thinking about how do corporates treat their employees in their workplace in challenging situations like the pandemic. We looked at the impact of social equality and social inequality coming through from the pandemic, and who were the winners and losers. From the governance side, we looked at geopolitics. We looked at sovereign nations having their own policies in terms of managing the pandemic. Now, as the pandemic morphs into an endemic, it's been very clear that ESG is a topic that needs to be solved, but it's also a topic that needs to be standardized. And it's also a topic that baffles the C-suite. And why do I say that? The challenges around data, the challenges around multiple frameworks. May I name a few? SASB, IR, GRI, WEF, TCFD, TNFD. I could be here all 1 hour going through all those frameworks. So what do corporates, financials, and sovereigns need to do? What framework are they going to use? Which metric are they going to use to report environmental risks or climate risks? What metric are they going to use to understand employee diversity, gender equality? What metric should they be using for carbon emissions? Weighted average carbon intensity? Is it just a standard carbon number per megaton or per ton? What about the other GHG gases out there as well? Other things that are evolving and coming out of these frameworks that make the C-suite scratch their head is, what about geopolitical risks? What about corporate lobbying? What about regulatory lobbying? What about health and safety? What are my responsibilities as a C-suite in terms of benchmarking myself to these metrics? And now, why are these metrics so important? Increasingly, we are seeing corporate companies having their C-suite, and especially the CEO, having their compensation packages tied to improving ESG metrics. But again, what bamboozles the financial services industry? There are a plethora of frameworks out there. So if I wanted to look at, and I'll give you a great example, Starbucks and their C-suite and their CEO is basically looking at certain metrics tied to the compensation package. How do I make sure that that metric is validated, it's in line? How do I also understand what is the historic ESG metric? What is going to be the forward-looking ESG metric as well? So for us to really understand ESG, it goes down to the question of data. And myself working with clients in the financial sector, the first question we get asked is, where do you get the data from? How do I get the data? Who holds the data? Should I go and buy off the shelf? Should I design my own tool? Can you help me with building a tool using your own solutions? How do I basically take all those numerous data points and standardize? And why is it important? Not just for the C-suite and the correlation to their compensation, but let's talk risk and finance. If we really want to understand what is the true value of a company, how do we look at the tangible parts of ESG and the intangible parts of ESG? And this is where we think about pricing and valuation. But our pricing and valuation is going to influence the calculation of a bond or a swap or the underlying equity for that corporate company. Now, there are a whole host of raft of regulations, which I could bore you with all day. But listed exchanges are being very clear that if you are listing on our exchange or you're an existing company on the exchange, you have ESG obligations. You must be doing these disclosures in certain different ways. If you are a financial services firm, you need to basically be looking at all the corporates that you are investing in, be it on the trading book, be it on the banking book. We need to understand what are their frameworks that are being used. Absolute challenge, huge challenge for financial services. Why? Because we are invested in multiple different areas. So we could be a bank invested or an asset management invested in power, in retail, in hospitality, or we could be a marine shipping bank. Every single dimension of these corporate sectors have different ESG views and metrics. And if we really want to understand, and not to get too technical, but if we want to understand our tail risks and how is that going to impact and how is that going to distort pricing, how is that going to look at the performance of a company for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we need, and I'm going to go back to it again, data, data, data. Without understanding the data, we cannot understand the reporting imperative. So for us to get there and to go on this journey, we need to bring in 3 elements: data, calculation, and reporting. Now, the PRA, FCA, and BOE in the United Kingdom are drafting proposals on what will be best practice for ESG and how that will look. But they're also integrating that with climate risk stress testing. Climate risk stress testing just generates a whole bunch of new metrics as well. Not just for a financial services firm, but corporate firms need to execute climate risk scenarios and climate risk stress testing as well. Where are they going to get that data from? It's from the E, the environmental part. Now, if we don't have metrics and frameworks for, let's say, climate risk and environmental risks in line with each other, we're going to get a distortion of the results and understanding what does ESG or what does the environmental part, the climate part, look like for a company in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years time, right? But again, it goes back to the challenges of data because we need to extrapolate out that data. Traditionally, financial markets have always been able to get data points and do forwardation and backwardation of curves. We're able to basically think about where do we see interest rates, for example, on a swap curve. But let me plant another idea in your mind. How do we see employee diversity in 5 years, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time? How do we see politics changing regionally with the emergence of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China? How are demographics going to evolve as well? And demographics is going to be very key here because the consumers on the ground are making that shift to and they want sustainable choices. So how do we use ESG to map back to what the consumer is doing on the ground, to what the corporate is doing, to what the opportunities are for the financial services firms to use the power of data calculation and reporting in ESG and look at those opportunities to help corporate clients. So some of my banking clients that I work with are putting together solutions for sustainable financing. So understanding the portfolio, do I exit from that sector, looking at their ESG metrics, or do I go and help them via sustainable financing? Do I think about green bonds, green loans, green mortgages? Do I help the consumers for that corporate company? How can they make that sustainable switch as well? What is the analysis required in terms of things like the supply chain? How do I tackle issues like inflation as well. And really, when you put together the financial markets data, the classic data that we've had, and now put this with, and increasingly we're calling it non-financial risk data, putting non-financial and financial together, makes this a very, very powerful impetus in terms of moving forward as well. And within Tata, we have our own challenges as well. Being part of the Tata Group, we have our subsidiary companies such as Tata Steel, Tata Coal, Tata Power. We've just acquired another airline, Air India, Vistara. We also have hospitality, travel, retail. We all within the Tata Group itself, we need to go on that decarbonization pathway, that sustainability pathway as well. So we're increasingly sharing a lot of our ideas as a consulting firm that's sitting in a rather huge conglomerate as well in terms of solving the challenges and sharing that with our clients as well. So look, that's a little bit more about data, the challenges and the calculation and the reporting, what we need to basically be thinking about in terms of these plethora of frameworks and the sort of views that I'm seeing out there. Back to yourself, Anu.
Thanks, Naveen, for setting the context and also to kind of give a little idea about where this whole ESG reporting is going to kind of take shape. So with this introduction with Naveen, what we'd like to actually do is speak a little bit about how this whole ESG is going to kind of shape up in the coming years, and what type of changes can one can expect. So while at this point in time there is a lot of buzz about ESG, so I think even if you take like 2 weeks of time, there's enough things to kind of read about, learn about, and still you'll run out of time. So that's the amount of information and content that ESG as a topic has created the buzz in the corporate world. So what we'd like to present in the next section of our webinar is to actually give a little glimpse of overall how is ESG reporting going to shape up. Of course, Naveen has kind of spoken about some of the challenges and spoken extensively about data. What we'd like to also introduce a little bit about how this whole ESG reporting could perhaps overall translate into a digital reporting format. While the data collection, which Naveen spoke about right now, it seems to be like a big challenge. And of course, there are a lot of standards and frameworks which exist right now. But let's say once we have some kind of a unified standard in place, and once companies start reporting, how does that kind of look like? In some countries, of course, companies are already preparing sustainability reports and also preparing ESG reports for publications. And most of the companies are kind of at this point in time submitting PDF files and putting up on their corporate websites. But there could be a very drastic transformation from what is being done right now through digital reporting standards. Some of the popular standards are called XBRL and IXBRL, which is what we'll talk about. But before we get into the topic of digital transformation or digital reporting, some of the benefits of what ESG has to kind of, some of the benefits that ESG brings in to the picture, especially in the corporate world, are many, many fold. You could be like a retail company, you could be like an airline company, a technology company, a company in the chemical industry, or any industry. So there's been like an interesting study which McKinsey actually put out, and also a survey which McKinsey actually came up with. And some of the benefits that this study actually highlights is that corporates who tend to adopt ESG early on and start reporting more of social, environmental, and governance information tend to get a very, very good chance when it comes to raising capital. And of course, the cost of raising capital is expected to be 10% lower compared to what they could at this point in time. Similarly, a lot of the C-suite leaders and professionals actually think that there's going to be like a huge value when it comes to overall investor attention, investor traction. And about like 4 years or 5 years from now, overall, there's going to be like a lot of importance and momentum that ESG will kind of shape up, and this will also have a huge impact on the shareholder value and the stock prices and stuff like that. Not to forget, I think the biggest thing that investors used to kind of look for when it comes to investing in companies or acquiring companies or, making any kind of investment decisions for many, many years now has been, financial data. What's the revenue of the company, or what are the profits, what is the stock prices and stuff like that. A lot of financial driven data, but definitely there is like a huge momentum, and the shift is very clear. It is not only financial reporting, but there's a huge momentum that's kind of coming up for non-financial reporting. And investors are also kind of looking for companies that are giving importance to ESG information. And in fact, one of the McKinsey study actually says that corporates are actually willing to pay about 10% premium to acquire companies that are taking ESG seriously and reporting good metrics when it comes to various parameters. Right from like carbon emissions or number of females on the management board, etc. So while these are just some benefits, there are many more which actually exist. So while ESG is in like an early stage in some countries it's being considered on a very strategic level. And at this point in time, just to give you a little landscape of what is that we kind of seeing globally. If you take a look at the US, a lot of Fortune 500 companies are already reporting, ESG information and sustainability reports, and they're kind of putting up on the corporate websites. There is also an XBRL, draft taxonomy. Of course, we'll take a little deep dive into XBRL in a little bit, but there is also, the Sustainability Standards Board in the US, which is like SASB, which is kind of put out like a draft XBRL taxonomy, which has been released. It's not a mandate yet to submit ESG or sustainability reports in structured data format or IXBRL or XBRL formats. But the act of the fact that there is a draft taxonomy released is an indication that maybe in the years to come, the US will kind of consider adoption of not just ESG information being reported in PDFs or on corporate websites, but being a part of regulatory reporting in structured data formats such as XBRL. Similarly, if you take a look at India, there is something called as BRSR reporting, which is actually a mandate by SEBI, which is the Securities Commission in India, which is about business responsibility and sustainability reporting. And in fact, the top 1,000 companies in India will have to start reporting sustainability information, and the scope of what needs to be reported has also been defined by SEBI. Similarly, in Europe, of course, there is EFRAG, which is the standard-setting body when it comes to sustainability information. And there is also conversations that maybe by 2024 or 25, but in a couple of years from now, while a lot of companies will start reporting information in for ESG, there is also a conversation around the fact that it's not just reporting of ESG metrics, which is important, but it should also be in digital reporting formats such as XBRL and IXBRL. So this is just to kind of give you a little glimpse of where this whole ESG as a topic is kind of headed to. With this little introduction, what we'd like to kind of speak a little about is the standard itself. So
I think just if we just take a step back there as well, Anu, I think what's very interesting is the plethora of frameworks that are coming out. And look, a great example here is you've got the SASB XBRL draft taxonomy released, but we know that the IFRS are embarking on consolidation of, for example, CDP, the SASB, IIR as well. Hopefully, the GRI will basically come on board as well. So what does that mean from an implementation perspective? Do we either do a wait or watch approach and implement and report, or do we future-proof our solution and think about how do I migrate from, let's say, when the IFRS finalize their proposals by the end of this year? And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that is out there in the industry, or do I go it alone? And do I basically create my own ESG framework as well and have my own internal methodology? And I've seen a number of different clients that I'm working with who have asked us to either build, internal ESG scoring. Now, at the end of the day, it's the client's choice and what they want to do. but it has to be done at the end of the day because there are regulatory obligations on reporting as well. And hopefully standards will arise and touch wood. I'm touching my desk at the moment. It is sustainable. Did buy it from IKEA, by the way. Just a bit of humor to keep everyone awake. It hopefully will happen. But we have to think about how do we future-proof? Do we do tactical? Do we do semi-strategic, or do we go strategic? Back to yourself, Anu.
Thanks, Naveen. So while this is what is the lay of the land at this point in time, with a lot of reporting frameworks coming into place, there is definitely initial conversations around it's not just report sustainability information, but it also needs to be in a manner that it is digitally available and it's available in a much quicker and a smarter way. So this is where a data standard called XBRL comes into picture. I think for those who are not familiar with XBRL, I'd like to spend a few minutes just to kind of explain what this standard is about. So XBRL is nothing but extensible business reporting language. So this is a language which machines can understand, and this particular reporting actually standard is almost 20 years old. It was very initially introduced, I think when the Enron happened in the US way back then, and I think there was a lot of scams and malpractices which was kind of there across the globe by different companies in different countries, which had a huge impact on the economy itself. And this is where a bunch of regulators and technologists and accountants came together and said that we cannot afford another big impact on the economy. But I think the biggest challenge was, though they were supervisory authorities or regulators, they were kind of getting all information in paper-based formats, PDF formats, HTML formats, web pages, etc. And information was not very, very, very easily accessible, leave alone, finding out any kind of mistakes or finding out any kind of, analysis that you want to kind of do. So that's how this whole digital reporting standard called Extensible Business Reporting Standard or language had kind of evolved, many, many years ago. So it is basically a royalty-free and open source standard, which is kind of available. And this data standard is actually managed by a consortium called XBRL International at a global level. Of course, there are also, geography-specific, XBRL consortiums, like XBRL US, there is XBRL UK, there is XBRL Europe, XBRL South Africa, so on and so forth. And this standard was originally, it started off for financial reporting, for corporates, for banks, for mutual funds, so on and so forth, so that regulators were able to kind of receive data in a manner that is machine readable, information is more accessible. However, now there is a huge wave to consider XBRL as a reporting standard, not just for financial reporting, but also for non-financial reporting. And this standard, like I said, has been there for over 20 years. It is adopted by over 100 regulators, like central banks, business registries, stock exchanges, and, tax regulators as well in over 60 countries. And this is just going to kind of expand. I think the number of countries, the number of regulators is just going to increase because regulators are actually able to see the value of information being available in a digital format. While this standard, like I said, was initially introduced for regulators, but the benefits of the standards are so much that investors are also beginning to look at, XBRL data or structured reporting formats for, various purposes. I'd like to actually introduce this concept of XBRL with a little real life example. So let's say if one of us wanted to buy a shirt from a store or online, we would go to a store or, just pick a shirt which is of, let's say, like a size M or like a size L. The reason why we do that is because it just, fits us. And if we just take a step back and think, why is that so that, we just go to a store and buy a size M or a size L and just things work for us, very well. That is because overall, all of the information is actually, standardized. If I have to pick a shirt size L, I know this is going to be the shoulder length, this is going to be the chest length, this is going to be the sleeve length, so on and so forth. So this actually makes our lives easy. So, this is like a very simple example. Similarly, if you want to buy shoes, you may buy a shoe of size 8 or size 9 or 10 or 11, depending on what your shoe size is. or even spectacles, where you have like power glasses, where you go to like a store, and if you have like a prescription and say, my power for the right eye is like 0.25 or 0.5, so you get something that works for you, and that's because everything is kind of standardized. So this really helps in day-to-day life. I think
unfortunately, Anu, since the pandemic, I've gone from medium to large.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it goes back to, on a serious point, how do you future-proof, right? And as we know, as these ESG metrics, the data universe and metrics that are going to increase, right? How are you going to shape and size those metrics? What is going to be best practice? And each country is going to have a different best practice, just like in the shape size you're showing here. I think America, and I don't want to offend any Americans, but UK. Maybe extra large, in the UK, maybe we're between medium and large, right? But what is your best practice ESG metric for, let's say, carbon, for example, or for, social inequality, social equality? What is going to be the ESG metric to measure corporate lobbying or regulatory lobbying by a company, so you can really understand the inner workings of these companies, and obviously top that off with reporting that you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with the pandemic, that's for a fact. A size M, L, or an L could be like an XL. Very real life example. Yes. So coming back to the presentation, so this is exactly what standards do. They're supposed to make life easier for every one of us, depending on where we are and what we want. So this overall standard about XBRL, now that I've given a little example, I think, of course, if you imagine yourself, if you're a corporate, you've been kind of reporting a lot of information in your annual report. You've been reporting a lot of information. Let's say if you already reported sustainability information, there's a lot that you kind of report, right? But if let's say, the regulator in your respective country says, okay, going forward, let's say from 2023 or 2024, you need to start reporting this information in a standard called XBRL or in a machine readable data standard. I think your first question would be, what am I supposed to report? Because there's so much that I report in my, in my reports, the ESG reports or even the financial reports for that matter. So usually what happens is, in various countries, the regulators come up with something called as a taxonomy, which is nothing but you can visualize like a data dictionary. It's just like a dictionary or a list of concepts. If it's like an ESG report, you may be interested in, let's say, carbon emissions, right? Emission 1, 2, and 3, scope 1 emission 1, 2, and 3. Or if you're interested in water management or waste management or hazardous waste, etc. So typically there is something called as a taxonomy, which is released, by different regulators. And this taxonomy has concepts, which is called tags in the world of XBRL. You can just think of as like concepts in a dictionary. It's arranged in a particular logical sequence. And these XBRL tags or concepts have something called as attributes. There are also interrelationships, between these XBRL tags. What I'd like to now take a step further is to kind of give a little financial example and then walk you through a non-financial example so that we understand what this means. Let's say there is a company, reporting like sales, of 7,348 million euro, like million GBP or million USD, depending on which country you are in. So when we see a report like this or like a financial statement, you're able to understand what this information is because you're reading it. So just imagine if I had kind of given like 100 reports and said, okay, let's kind of pick the top 3 companies which has the top, highest revenue. It will be like hugely impossible, right? So that is where, data standards come into picture. Let's say if I just picked this number, which is like 7,348, just as a number without telling you anything, right? This could be like the number of, let's say, employees in an organization. Or if you're a retail company, this could be the number of outlets that you have in your country or, globally. It could also be maybe the number of, shares that a particular person, holds. For example, it can be anything. So what we mean by, structured data reporting or, digital transformation is that when this particular number 7,348, let's say this company is, following IFRS as an accounting, standard. So, there is something called as an IFRS taxonomy or like a data dictionary, which has been introduced. And in that data dictionary, there is something called as a XBRL tag, which is called IFRS revenue, right? Though the company is reporting sales, there is a concept called IFRS revenue, because revenue and sales is supposed to be the same. And now, if I just say revenue and 7348, this is still incomplete. The missing information is, for which period is this information being reported? It's being reported for a 12-month period. It is being reported in euro in this example. It is also being reported in millions. So now, when this number has an electronic tag called IFRS revenue, and when it has these three items, which is called period, unit, and scale. So these are called attributes, by the way, which we just saw on the last slide. This is when the information is complete. And once all of this comes together, this is how information is being able to be read by machines. So once in a quarterly report, an information called sales is mapped to this electronic attributes, machine. This is just code. XBRL is just code where you can kind of get all the information. For example, again, if you're kind of going to like a store to buy like groceries as an example, so you would pick a bunch of things, you'd go to the billing counter and kind of put each product under a scanner. And it is not very highly likely that there's somebody sitting and kind of billing your things with making a notes of list of the product, the price, the quantity, etc. You just put the product under the scanner, and the machine is able to read the information in the barcode, because the barcode has all of the information of the product. For example, the name of the product, the price of the product, the quantity of the product, and if there are any discounts of the product, everything is there in that barcode. So you can kind of visualize XBRL being a barcode-like thing which machines are able to read. So this is one example from the financial space. Now, if we just take a little step forward when it comes to non-financial information, let's say there is a company A, who's reporting energy consumed, and it's reporting 15,000 gigajoules. Using the same logic, which I just explained a little earlier, if I just take the number 15,000, of course, nobody can make out what this 15,000 is. So in this example, let's say this company has reported this information based on the SASB framework, as an example. Like I said, SASB has released a draft XBRL taxonomy. And in that draft XBRL taxonomy, there is an electronic tag, which is called SASB _, energy consumed. So when I apply this electronic tag to this number, and again, associate that this is for the period, the 12-month period, which is 2020, and, the units is gigajoules, and, they're kind of reported in actuals. And even in this case, machines are able to read this information. Further, now you can see that this company is reported energy consumed, but let's say there is another company which is reported, let's say, aggregate amount of energy consumed, which is nothing but one and the same, but it's just a different way of how company B reports. A company C could report in the way they want. Using the same, process, which I just explained, once you have company B with this information, 25 to 45, when we apply the same electronic tag, which is energy consumed, and the period, the unit, and the scale, what happens is that information now becomes comparable, which means that what company A called energy consumed and what company B called aggregate amount of energy consumed becomes comparable. So imagine if you're an investor and you want to kind of compare information across different companies to make, let's say, like an investment decision, right? Or if you want to kind of acquire a company and you want to compare information, all of the information right now is actually locked in like PDF files or maybe on like corporate web pages. But if each company comes and information in a digitally reported format, like it's, the power of data comes much, more imagination, wherein you have access to all the data that you need. This is going to kind of help you in not just accessing data, but also in comparability of data. So that's the power of XBRL. I think Naveen has a comment here.
Thank you so much, Anu. So I think, this gives you great examples of understanding. Let's say company A is using one framework, company B is using a different framework. And let's say you are a financial services firm. So with my clients that I'm working with, and within Tata, the problem statement we face is that we're not just seeing company A and B, we're seeing company A to company AA, AZ, AB, thousands and thousands of companies, i.e. counterparties and trades that are basically happening. Now, what do we have to do within Tata is basically understand okay, hold on a minute, how do I organize that data? So, for example, to make sure that that reporting can happen, right? If I can't get the right framework or the right metric in place, right? How can I basically enable XBRL reporting? How can I have standardization? Now, when you look at this sector by sector, these metrics are going to be different, and rightly so. But at the end of the day, we need to come back to first principles. We need to understand what is going to be a common metric for, let's say, energy consumed, and what is going to be that unit. Now, we know there is alignment. For example, let's take energy or carbon, for example, between the TCFD and the PCAF methodology. So the PCAF methodology, which is all about calculating your carbon emissions within coming off from an investment, right? Now, that's a very good start, and it's really good to have alignment. It would be great to know that climate risk is going to be aligned to the TCFD, which is then further aligned to the PCAF. So we are getting there, but the challenges that we have, especially within Tata and our clients, is that these evolving methodologies, evolving calculations that are basically taking place. And there was a brief comment by Anu about taxonomies as well, right? Guess what? Taxonomies are going to be a challenge as well. We have the EU green taxonomy that's been released, and we have SFDR regulations, and we have CSRD regulations, which are privy to the EU taxonomy. Very much helps us connect financials and non-financials together to have a common standard of reporting. But hold on a minute, that taxonomy will be subject to change, and there was a big hoo-ha in January about, does gas and nuclear constitute green? And what really is green? Or is it shades of green, just like shades of grey, is it shades of green that we should be thinking about, or shades of brown that we should be thinking about as well? So, your taxonomy is going to be continuously updated as well, and subject to, obviously, sovereign nations within the EU. But there are also taxonomies coming out in other countries. For example, Malaysia is a great example. We also have proposals for the SDR, the Sustainability Disclosure Regulations in the UK. Now, what is currently happening is the industry feels that, okay, just do a copy and paste of the EU taxonomy and have the UK taxonomy. But then we have the political angle, which is Brexit. So within Brexit, we're saying, okay, how can we arbitrage and how can we have competitive advantage by making some industries maybe green, a lighter shade of green, or a darker shade of green, and the same thing from a high carbon side. So again, data is going to change, frameworks are going to change. So what is the journey, and what are the types of technologies that you need to bring in so you can help the business and the investors understand where are the opportunities and where they lie? And I'll touch upon accounting and audit impacts shortly. Let me hold that thought and back to Anu. Back to yourself, Anu.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. So this little introduction about this data standard called XBRL, what we'd like to now show you is a glimpse of, let's say if your company is already, reported sustainability information. We've taken an example of, a couple of companies who've reported their sustainability information using the SASB framework. So now what we'd like to present to you is an example of how your ESG report, can be transformed into a digital reporting format, which machines can understand, which is going to have huge benefits for investors, or different stakeholders, etc. I'd like to kind of now invite my colleague Anushree to kind of present her screen. And while she presents her screen, we'd like to give a little information that, the examples which Anushree is going to show right now is all publicly available information. And, the information that we've mapped and tagged is completely done by IRIS and IRIS Carbon. And the tagging or the mapping is not something which has been endorsed by the company. So this is just a little, heads up. And over to you, Anushree.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Naveen, for the deep explanation about the concept of ESG and the XBRL. Hello, everyone from my side, and I will just quickly share the screen. I hope my screen is visible. Okay.
Yes, it is, Anushri.
Yeah. So the screen which you are able to see, there
and
is
you're
a
on mute. Your screen is visible, but you're on mute.
No. Am I audible? Am I audible?
I can hear you, Anushri.
Just give Anushri.
Hello?
We can hear you, Anushri.
Okay, great. The screen you are able to see right now is the annual report. As Anu has mentioned, this is available in the public domain. The information on this particular page is related to the sustainability disclosure topics and the accounting metrics. So this is a typical example wherein the companies will be giving the information about the greenhouse gas emissions, about the air pollution emissions, about the different type of gases which are released. And this information will be a very critical information once it will be captured in the taxonomy. So talking about the taxonomy, we have the SASB taxonomy, which is incorporated on the platform itself. I'll be quickly running you through this taxonomy. The SASB taxonomy over here is also known as the reference taxonomy because we will be using this taxonomy for the tagging or linking of the data. A typical taxonomy is always divided into sections so that whatever section is applicable to the data, you can pick up the concepts or the tags from the relatable section or the division and you can apply it to the numbers. So currently here you can see there are multiple number of divisions in the reference or the SASB taxonomy. Depending on the nature of the company, you can go ahead and select any of the category along with the code. So code is given for the easy identification again for the type of company you are in. And you can select the concept and apply it to the given value. So this will give the identification, electronic identification to the numeric value. The company currently under this particular XBRL review is a paint company, and the disclosure which I have is regarding the greenhouse gas emission. For example, I have the gross global scope emission. So the typical information which is given in the report represents what is the emission, okay, and this emission is represented in the metric tons. Now, what happens is that every company needs to identify the nature of the company along with the SASB concepts which are there. This being a paint company, it has disclosed the SASB code as well in the report. So it states that RTCH, which means the resource transformation and related to the chemicals. The concepts might be quite new to understand, but once you view your own data in this particular from this particular perspective, it will be very easier for you as well to identify the tags or the concepts. So in the taxonomy over here, we can simply go ahead and scroll for the related division. So I have the division of resource transformation and related to the chemicals. So this is the exact link which I need to go ahead and check for. Under this, I have the disclosures for greenhouse gas emission, and the value of 57,160 relates to the global emission, scope 1. So I have found the concept of global scope 1 emission. Further, wherever I need information about the concept, you can definitely go ahead and see the properties. So these are the attributes. And you can also view the meaning of the concept. So here it says gross global scope 1 emissions. So now I know that this concept is appropriate for the information which I'm searching to or which I'm willing to go ahead and tag with. So I'll use the concept and I will tag the information. So what this typically does is that it gets linked to the number. And along with that, I also need to define the other attributes. Just like we saw in the financial example, that every number is linked to a tag, a period, a scale. and a unit. Similarly, the non-financial values also we need to tag to all these attributes so that it gives the perfect meaning and perfect hang of the given number. So here I know that the scale is tons. So I will select the scale as tons from the drop down, or the scale is actuals. So I will select the actuals as the scale, and the unit is tons. So I will select the same. Okay. And since this report is for 2020, I will select the total context, or you can say the period, the annual period of 1st of January 2020 to 31st of December 2020. So just a second, I will select this period, and I will link all these parameters to the highlighted number. So now here the system knows that, okay, this particular value is related to the class 1 or the scope 1 emissions, and all the concepts, all the attributes are appropriately assigned. So this is just assigning an electronic tag to the given value. So similarly, we have a number of information which is very, very informative, and you can view the information right over here. For example, I have the air emission of the pollutants. So there are the factors which do trigger or come under the scanner for this when you are going ahead with the ESG reporting. For example, I have the tags for the air emission and air emission volume, and to what it relates, the different components of the emission. So air emissions can be from several ways, and one of this is nitrogen oxide. You might have the sulfurous oxide, carbon monoxide, and such kind of harmful gases. So the air emission volume is related with the component which is released. So as much detail you have in your report, the tags are there, or the electronic information is there to capture it appropriately and be presented to the regulators. Talking about the non-financial example, yes, definitely this is a non-financial example, but not only this, if you have a paragraphic example which does not contain a particular value, even that needs to be tagged. So I will just show you a typical example wherein this paragraph speaks about the water management. So this is the description of the water management of the risk, and such kind of disclosures are also very important in disclosure part of the ESG reporting. And hence we have tagged it, or we have captured it using a text block concept. So the entire concept or the entire paragraphs forms one value which can be reported to the regulator. So these are certain examples wherein you can go ahead and you can represent each and everything to the regulators using the SASB or the different taxonomies which will be released across the globe for the ESG reporting. It is not only about the tagging, but the next important part is about the previewer. So just a second, I will. So this, the currently screen which you are able to see is a viewer, and this viewer represents the entire information what you have tagged currently. So for example, this link will be of much more importance. You can flag it up on your company's website once the ESG reporting comes into picture. And this will facilitate a very easy comparison of the data, which Anu was just talking about, the company A and company B example, non-financial example. So in this case, what happens is that, okay, I have now tagged my entire report using the SASB taxonomy for the sustainability accounting standards. And I have hosted this Weaver link, XBRL Weaver link on the company's website. My IRs can come on the platform and they can also check for, this is very important for the IR or the analytics or the comparability of the data. You can simply select a concept or you can search a concept and find the values. This gives the on-the-spot comparison of the data for your entire tagging which you have done. So this definitely holds a great gravity towards the reporting of the ESG data. So apart from the tagging, yes, hosting the Weaver link for easy comparability of the data also has a different space in the ESG reporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushree. I was just going to add a couple of comments there as well. You see, this is the issue because we don't have standardization yet. We're going to just see a range of metrics, a range of numbers, a range of different values. Now, this is where the EU taxonomy, the proposal from the EU social taxonomy as well, and consolidation from the IFRS is really going to help us. And again, when we are designing our data and calculation for our clients, we're always told that, look, we're just going to pick these 3 or 4 sources, but we're not going to have these sources, or we have these data feeds, from example, let's say Moody's or Fitch, or we'd like to use your own data product, which is providing some of the feeds into the bank. Can you help us do that? So every client has a different problem, unfortunately. And look, at the end of the day, it's technology. Technology is going to help us solve this problem. And this is where clients need to basically put in their investment, right? But it's really getting across to the C-suite that they're not being, they understand the ESG metrics, so they don't get accused of greenwashing and social washing, which seems to come out in the news every day these days.
Correct.
Thanks, Anushree, for showing like a practical example. So this is how this whole ESG standard is likely to shape. While initially companies will be reporting PDF information and hosting it in their websites and things like that, but once it becomes a mandate, you'll be required to comply with that, compulsorily. But I think what we're trying to show you is the future of how this ESG is going to kind of shape up, and when information is going to be in a format which is machine readable. This is how the information would be looking like. So I think the biggest benefits of having your ESG reporting in a structured digital reporting format are actually 2. Like Anushree just showed, your information on ESG data is going to be highly searchable, which means if there is an investor who's tracking your company or an analyst who's tracking your company, they can simply search for information on your corporate website. They can kind of get all of this information easily. One step further, if this ESG data is also available into like an downloadable data model, then it becomes even more fantastic. So that's the first benefit which Anushree just showed you. The second benefit, which I'm going to speak about and actually show you a little example, is about the comparability of information. We saw an example, company A and company B. But let's say, if there are companies in a particular industry and you want to compare those industries, by way of different parameters, how will that be? So for this example, I've kind of taken three companies, company A, B, and C, of different revenue sizes. And if I want to compare these 3 companies by, let's say, 4 parameters, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, water, management, then what happens is each of this information of these 3 companies become available with a click of a button. So for example, you can see that the company B, though it has overall, the total energy consumed, it has, the lowest percentage of renewable energy as an example. And overall, when it comes to, water management, it's got, the percentage of water in the stressed regions is about like 2.06. And further, if you see hazardous waste, you can see that company C has the least percentage of, waste, which is kind of recycled. So if you're a company who's kind of, tracking, or if there's like an investor tracking your company, or if there are analysts who want to kind of track your, numbers. So once it is in information in a digital reporting format, there are lots of possibilities of peer benchmarking comparisons and so on. And this is just one little example of an actual use case. Once the information is converted into a data reporting format, this is how one could use the information from a comparability purpose. Any comments, Naveen?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Anil. I was quite ingrained in looking at the data, and look, these are very common metrics that basically come out through the, to the board, to the investors, to the banker, right? And what really the banker needs to understand is, what does this mean for me, right? And this is where the risk and finance function need to play a very, very big part in understanding, like, these are the changes that are going to happen. These are the impacts of these corporates, of these metrics to society, to environment, from a social aspect as well. And we need to basically be showing that we are acting in a social way and not policing the system, but guiding the corporates in the right way to improve these metrics, right? So whilst prior to the pandemic, this was very much more driven by the fact that, onus was on corporates. The onus has now gone on financials, right? But it's a good thing and we're going in the right direction. But again, my clients ask me and say, show me the data and how you can take the data and calculate the data, regress, interpolate, forward, backwardate the data, and show me how does that change. And a lot of these inputs that you're seeing here go into, for example, climate risk stress testing. So, for example, one bank that we're working with in designing the climate risk stress and the scenarios, just the sheer amount of data points that are basically required to understand the impact of climate change and the impact of a company and how they're going to operate in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from physical risks, transition risks and environmental risks is going to be very, very key as well. So I'm just conscious of time because we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah. So I think I hope this gives all our participants a good idea of how ESG is going to kind of shape up and what's the future of ESG is going to be like. And if any of the participants are already reporting their ESG reports using different frameworks, like I said, there is an XBRL taxonomy available. If you're a company who's kind of creating ESG reports using a SASB framework, feel free to kind of let us know. We are happy to kind of help you to actually work with you and publish your reports in those digital reporting formats. And the email address that you can contact us is info@iriscarbon.com. And a quick introduction, of course, of who we are. We are the name of the company is IRIS Business Services. We are a company who's extensively working on data reporting standards. We are a RegTech company, and we have technology solutions services for anybody who wants to comply with digital reporting standards, and also anybody who's passionate about volunteering to kind of adopt these standards. We extensively work with XBRL as a reporting standard. We are members of XBRL International, XBRL Europe, US, and South Africa as well. And these are our select clients from different countries across Europe and UK. Since this webinar was more focused for the audience from Europe and UK, we do also have a lot of customers in other geographies like US, South Africa, and so on. And with this, we actually see there are a few questions, and maybe we can just take a few minutes to answer some of these questions. I think the first question is, I think this is a question for you, Naveen. Can you explain the do's and don'ts of ESG reporting in a broader perspective?
Yes, very good question as well. So I think do's and don'ts, do understand your scope. That's very, very important. You need to, when we're working with our clients, the first thing is understanding what are the sectors. Do understand what are the technologies that are available there. I mean, XBRL is just one example. There are so many other technologies out there as well. Don't try and antagonize your stakeholder from, let's say, a revenue generating perspective. Because we still don't understand ESG completely at the moment. It's going to take time. So getting the message across needs to be done very sensitively, because pricing and valuation, and when we're looking at the pricing of spreads, so when I mean SOCIUM spreads, I mean social spreads, and greenium spreads, so green spreads for bonds and markets is still being established. And again, that's going to impact pricing and valuation. So don't go off in the wrong direction in terms of the wrong data sets, especially for the investor community or the revenue generating function. I think another question is, what should be the first step in this reporting? Where should we start? I think the next part I would say there, understanding your sectors. You need to understand what sector are you in. If you're a financial institution, for example, within financial institutions, you're going to be multi-sector. So what are you going to be privy for from a scoping perspective as well? Where should we start? data. You need to look at your external data sources and your internal data sources. Then you need to look at what type of calculation layer and logic do you need across different departments, and then top it off with the reporting. And this is a great example of how you're doing reporting to, for example, a regulator as well. How can organizations navigate the ever-changing ESG landscape? We just need to keep monitoring the market. I am constantly talking to my clients on a weekly basis, banks, asset managers, pension funds, insurers, in terms of providing them the update in terms of what are the new ESG frameworks, what are the metrics, what are the regulatory obligations, what are the views of the sectors as well. There are a number of different alliances that have been set up, like a net zero alliance for asset managers, net zero alliance for the banks, for example. I could go on and on and on about the different types of alliances, but being part of the industry consortium and feeding back to industry consortium or your regulator to help collectively financial sovereigns and corporates define the standards that are required on this journey. So collectively, we all have to work together on this to really define the ESG landscape. And I think there's a question for yourself, Anushree, as well.
Yeah, so I think one of the questions is what should be the first step for digital reporting? Where can companies start? So it all depends on what frameworks are you kind of using. So in the example like we showed, SASB has released a draft taxonomy. That's the reason we were able to convert an ESG report into structured data reporting. So it all depends on what frameworks are you using, and for that framework, if there is like an XBRL taxonomy which is kind of released. And like I said, if you're kind of interested in seeing your annual reports into this, your sustainability reports into this particular new format, feel free to write to us at info@iriscarbon.com, and we'll be very happy to assist you with this digital transformation process, which will, get started in a few years. So like I said, the benefits are many. You can be like an early adopter of this technology and, get a lot of investor traction, analyst attention and things like that. And of course, you could also use for comparing information across different years. So that's how, one could typically get started with, sustainability information being transformed into IXBRL or XBRL. So I think with this, we can kind of, we have a few more questions. We'll definitely try and answer those questions via an email. We're kind of almost running out of time, but we really are happy to see the interest and the questions kind of flowing in here. And once again, thank you everyone who's attended our webinar, both via the Zoom link and also via the YouTube streaming. We will be hosting more webinars on ESG and various other topics. Stay tuned for our webinars, and thank you so very much. And have a nice afternoon and an evening or a morning, depending on where you are.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Naveen, for being our speaker.
No worries at all. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.